Today I'd like to introduce the WOCIP organization. I have with me one of our founders of the organization who will share a little bit about what our organization does and the impact that we're trying to make in women's lives, in particular Black and Latino women. Can you introduce yourself and share a little bit about the WOCIP organization?
I am Kanisha Wofford-Woods. I am the Director of Marketing for WOCIP, and in fact, I am indeed a founding member who has led the creative direction and brand strategy for WOCIP since its implementation in 2015. Quite honestly, what we are seeking to accomplish is to really kind of transform the landscape for women of color in the pharmaceutical industry, but more importantly, helping them to find their way, helping them to find their purpose.
So tell us a little bit about how has WOCIP impacted you personally?
Wow. When I think about the strategy for my career, initially it was about sustainability, security, and comfort. All great things, of course, but for me, I was kind of not accelerating in my career. WOCIP empowered me to kind of take a different look at my career journey and how I can progress forward. Today, I have moved up about 3 or 4 levels since I've joined WOCIP, and I owe that all to the network and the encouragement of the women on the board, as well as some of the members.
That's amazing. I know I've personally been able to witness your growth, and it's been inspiring. Final words for those who aren't familiar with WOCIP, if you had to describe in 1 or 2 statements what the impact means potentially globally to women of color.
The first thing I think of is one of our themes, which is get inspired and be empowered. That's what WOCIP means. Quite honestly, no longer should we just sit down and just wait for opportunity. Gain insights, learn from other women, seek out individuals who are in positions of influence, and take charge of your career.
So Kanisha, one of the ways we've bring women together over the years is through our annual conference, and this year is our 4th annual conference. Can you tell us a little bit about the theme, The Greatest Show? And what inspired you for that?
Honestly, the greatest show represents the collective, the power of the women in this organization. It is a spotlight on us. It's a spotlight on us as Black women and Hispanic women who are definitely making moves. We are transforming the pharmaceutical landscape, and that's what it's really about.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that and your personal story. Looking forward to hearing more from you later.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for allowing WOCIP the opportunity to share a little bit about our organization's perspectives on global health equity and gender equity. I'm joined today with board members from the organization. And first, I'll start with some introductions. Kemi, would you like to introduce yourself, share a little bit about your background and your role within WOCIP?
Absolutely. Thank you, Pat. So I'm Kemi Olugemo. I'm a neurologist and physician scientist. I've been in the industry for a little over 12 years, and at WOCIP, I'm the Director of Communications.
Monique.
Hi, my name is Monique Adams. I have my PhD in pharmacology. I have a background in the industry in clinical operations. Been in the industry a little over 15 years, and I am a vice president of the organization.
Katrina. Hi, Pat. Hi, everyone. My name is Lorena Curi, born and raised in Mexico, by the way. I've been in the industry for almost 15 years. My background is commercial, but now I do diversity and clinical trials. And my role in WOCIP is global leadership.
Well, over 50 years of experience, I think I tabulated there between the 3 of you. So we have the experts here to talk about global health equity, especially when it refers to health disparities and clinical research. Starting maybe with you, Monique, can you share a little bit about clinical research, clinical trials, the challenges we've seen in clinical trials when it comes to diversity?
So thank you, Pat, and that's a really good question, right? So I think that when we think about clinical trials, there's definitely been a challenge over the years in terms of really getting equal representation into those studies, right? So if we think about the population, Black Americans probably make up about 13% of the population, Hispanics about 18% of the population, But when we look at clinical trial participants, those numbers are significantly reduced.
Mm-hmm.
So, anywhere between, for Blacks, like less than 9% of the participation that actually participate in clinical trials, and less than 1% of Latinos actually participate in clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you don't have that representation, you don't really have a really good feel of how safe and effective medicines will be in that patient population, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that can add to some of the health disparities, because now you'll get drugs that are approved that may not be effective in that population because we didn't test it in that population.
Yeah, thank you, Monique. That's wow, 1% in the Latina community. That is always a staggering figure to me. Building on that, health disparities
became illuminated during COVID. Can you share a little bit about your perspective, Kemi, in terms of how that has impacted how we're now looking at health disparities?
Absolutely. So unfortunately, health disparities have been a part of our society for far too long. And we know that communities of color are disproportionately affected and have worse outcomes. And these are in large part due to structural inequities. And these structural inequities manifest in the form of a disproportionate amount of comorbid conditions, chronic conditions such as hypertension, diabetes, obesity. And during the COVID era, these disparities have been magnified, unfortunately. So now that we know that communities of color are disproportionately affected by COVID, so above the baseline of just having those background inequities, unfortunately, if you are Black or brown, you are more likely to get diagnosed with COVID. And when you actually do get COVID, you're more likely to have a worse outcome. We also know that our communities have fewer access to appropriate diagnosis and testing, fewer access to personal protective equipment. And in the beginning, especially when the pandemic was beginning, we didn't necessarily have the right information to educate our communities in terms of the rampant nature of COVID in communities of color, that we are just as affected as everybody else. Now we know that we're more affected, and how to adequately protect ourselves.
And Lorena, from a global perspective, as the global leadership development head for WOCIP, how do you see this playing out from health disparities and from a clinical research standpoint? From a Latina's perspective, is there something different happening there?
So, very good question, Pat. And this, the simple is not simple. The answer is not simple. Sorry. What happens is that the less information that we have, the less viable that we will be, the less able we will be to go back to the authorities and require our drugs or our products to be registered in any market. So if we don't have information with enough population from Brazil, Brazilians or Latinos or Black people or Asian people, the health authorities will simply say, I will not approve this drug because of that. So it doesn't really matter how much amazing research we do. There is no way to connect development with access. And let's not even talk about reimbursement. That is the portion where health equity is also impacting. And that's not happening only in Latin America. That's happening in Europe. That's happening in Africa. So I would say that COVID just exacerbated the need that we have for more diversity in our clinical trials. And in the search for the vaccine and for adequate treatments, the inclusion of minorities and medically underserved populations is becoming more and more relevant.
So the two are very tied, is what I'm hearing from you. Well, the UN Sustainability Goals for 2030 are really focused on action and taking action to address some of the very same issues that the three of you have raised. So I'd like to go around again to hear your thoughts on what is WOCIP doing to have an impact in these spaces. Maybe I'll start with you, Kemi. When it comes to health disparities specifically around COVID, what has WOCIP done?
Yeah, so WOCIP has done a number of things. We held a roundtable discussion very early on at the beginning of the pandemic with experts who were frontline workers, physicians, and other healthcare providers. And the purpose of this roundtable was to really educate our community and educate the society in terms of what was happening, because all the information that we were getting was really quite new. We didn't know how how COVID was spread. There were a lot of myths out there, and so we had people who were actually on the ground who had more of the correct information than people who were not, come together and give a roundtable discussion on how COVID is diagnosed, how it's spread, how to protect yourself, and things like that. So that's one of the things that WOCIP did. We also had a second roundtable that was focused on educating those of us who have children who are homeschooled. So that was a forum of educators, and they were basically giving pearls and information about how to best support your children who are in school and be able to work and function from home in a virtual environment, something that we were all not used to and really had to get up to speed quite quickly. So we had those two roundtable discussions, and they were really well attended, and we got a lot of good feedback from that. In addition, the WOCIP Society donated money to an organization called the Black COVID Doctors Consortium. And this organization is based in the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area. And their goals are to provide education to the community and also to provide mobile testing. And so, they'll go out into the community and also provide personal protective equipment and test people and make sure that, when they're diagnosed, they can direct them to the proper healthcare provider. So WOCIP donated to that organization as part of our efforts to combat COVID.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit about some of the publications that you've been working on to address some of the disparities you've seen there and how information is being reported on COVID impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So WOCIP has a publication addressing health inequities in the Black community in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And the impetus of that particular manuscript was to provide solutions that we thought were low-hanging fruit, solutions that could be implemented fairly quickly, given the effect that we knew COVID was having in the Black and Brown communities. So even though the publication was focused on the Black community, many of the solutions that we proposed were applicable to the Latino community as well, because we see similarities in terms of the disparities in both of those communities. But at that time, we had more data for Black communities, and that's why the focus was really there. So we recommended that more transparent data on racial outcomes be made available to the communities so that we know what's happening on the ground and the appropriate resources can be directed to those communities that need it most. We also advocated for more education and more testing. Also the provision of more personal protective equipment, which at that time we wrote the paper was really severely lacking.
So the organization really pivoted around that time to directly address these issues and be a voice.
We did. And one other thing that I'll mention that we spoke about in the manuscript is the idea of how to allocate scarce resources. So there was a publication put out by the New England Journal of Medicine that was a thought piece, really, discussing how resources like ventilators could be allocated in a time of scarcity. And some of the solutions that were proposed could be problematic for communities of color. So for example, one of the solutions was to assign ventilators to those people who were thought to have a greater likelihood of surviving or a better outcome. And as we mentioned earlier, Black and Brown communities have a higher proportion of chronic illnesses. So at baseline, if you are more ill and you don't have right access to healthcare, and then there's one ventilator, and then you have someone who has really had really great insurance and healthcare, and you both get COVID, so you get hit twice.
Wow.
So we thought that, that recommendation was really misplaced, and we really felt strongly about that. Another recommendation was in terms of clinical trial participation. So there was a recommendation to assign greater priority in terms of receiving treatment to those who agree to participate in clinical trials. And while we agree that participating in clinical trials is important, we do need to remember that there are reasons why Black communities and Black communities in particular may not have the same access to clinical trials. So part of it stems from longstanding mistrust of the system and of prior injustices, just like the Tuskegee experiment. Others stem from just not having not having clinical trial sites more accessible in your particular community. So
right where they are.
Exactly. So if you don't know that a trial is happening and you can't get to the trial in a reasonable amount of time, then you can't participate. One last thing that I will mention is the issue of frontline workers. So frontline workers, we're very grateful for them, and they were also supposed to be given priority in terms of allocating scarce resources. Well, we just wanted to point out that frontline workers also include those who are working outside roles such as physicians and nurses and perhaps, respiratory therapists. They include those people providing food services, sanitation services, and a lot of frontline workers are people of color who are not traditionally recognized as frontline workers, and we just wanted to make sure that that fact was brought to light.
So through that process, the Women of Color in Pharma was stepping beyond our focus on women, really focusing on the community and advocating as a thought leader in that space.
I think it was absolutely necessary to do that because right in the moment, we could not turn a blind eye to what was happening. And we have expertise within the organization in terms of thought leaders and experts who can actually propose solutions. And so we thought it was a moral obligation for us to step in and pivot during these times.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kemi. Monique, building on the challenges you mentioned around clinical trials and access to clinical trials, and also Kemi has underscored in the COVID article, what are some of the solutions that you see WOCIP taking on to try to address this challenge or bring greater advocacy to the challenge?
So I would definitely say that one of the things that really needs to happen is really that greater partnership with the community. Right? So I think that one of the things that Kemi mentioned was that mistrust. And so how do we address the mistrust? And so that is really trying to take advantage of those partnerships that already currently exist in the community and building a relationship with those partnerships to help support kind of that community outreach, that community engagement, that clinical trial awareness piece. And so I think that is where we see ourselves moving in the future, is really trying to build those partnerships with those organizations to really effectively deal with and address the mistrust, and then provide like that clinical trial awareness and education about why it's important for them to be part of those clinical trials, why it's important that when they're not a part of those trials and then those medicines get approved, that in the long term, it may impact them because there are medicines that are out there that may not be effective in that population or may not be safe in that population. If there's a side effect profile that was not realized because it wasn't tested in all of the populations of the individuals that are affected by that particular disease.
Very, very, very powerful and very onerous task to take on. Lorena, building on these themes, when you think about the global work that you've been leading, where do you see the greatest opportunity is from a WOCIP standpoint?
I think because this is not a problem exclusive to any country or to a specific stakeholder of the healthcare industry, collaboration is key. And the more that we work together as an ecosystem, the better. And that's not happening, as I said before, here in the US, but across the world. Another important thing is that through WOCIP, we are like providing certain tools that will help women of color to be outspoken and to take place in the decision making. And that is where the impact of thinking about diversity in clinical trials from design, the impact of having an equity lens from design can help these populations. The more inclusive this workplace becomes, the more inclusive the marketplace will be. Just think about the principal investigators or the staff at the research centers. I'd rather to go and see someone who looks like me. I feel more comfortable with that. So that's happening across the world. And your zip code, your country of origin, your background should not be a determinant of your health outcomes here or anywhere.
I love that. Should not be a determinant here or anywhere. I love that. And I love your connection around raising and I guess calling out these issues that are not appropriately representing or the underlying issues around disparity and what you raised, Monique, in terms of the importance of partnership and how critical that is. We can't get here by ourselves. We can't make the dent we would like by ourselves. So partnership is going to be critical there. I'd love to hear a final round of comments from each of you when it comes to, again, global health equity and the role WOCIP is positioning themselves to take as an organization. What are your final thoughts?
So my final thoughts are that even though we have proposed short-term solutions, we know that in order to really be a truly equitable society, some legislation needs to change. So I think that WOCIP would like to be, a trusted partner and a resource, and would continue to really march towards this North Star. The North Star is really to have equity for all. And, we just hope that the society realizes how incredibly important this is as a moral obligation, so that we can work together to implement solutions that are permanent.
Thank you, Kemi. Thank you. Very powerful. Monique?
And I was going to build on, I was going to say what Kemi said. But because one of the things that I talked about partnership was the community. But I think that the other partnership that we really need to focus on are the regulatory authorities, the health authorities, not, globally across the world, to really kind of help provide support and us really addressing the health equity issues. So, thank you.
I can just say yes and yes. If not now, then when? And we need to make sure that we address it not as a trending topic or as what's happening in 2020, but establishing the processes that make us address it or solve it in a sustainable way. It's not just what's happening today.
Well, thank you, all three of you, and thank you for continuing to be leaders within WOCIP. Thank you for participating in this moment with Ideagen TV and sharing with this audience a little bit about the work WOCIP is doing and leading around global health equity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm joined today with board leaders from our organization, and in this discussion, we're going to talk about our impact in gender equity. So let me first start with introductions. Why don't we go around and have each of you introduce yourselves, talk about your role in WOCIP, and a little bit about your background. Vickie?
Sure, thanks, Pat. My name is Vickie. I've been in the industry for over 12 years now, in various capacities, and I've been a member of WOCIP for the past couple of years, and right now I'm serving as the Vice President of the Foundation Arm.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat. Hi, everyone. My name is Lorena Curi. I am originally from Mexico, where I started my career in pharma around 13 years ago. Today, my full-time job is on diversity and clinical trials, but in WOCIP, where I have been for 3 years now, I am serving since this year as one of the directors on global leadership.
Annie.
Hi, I'm Annie Harris. I am currently a director in the clinical development area called CTMS. But for WOCIP, I'm a founding member, and I currently serve as Director of Information and Technology.
And Kat.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katrina. Hi. I have been in the pharmaceutical industry for over 15 years. I'm an analytical scientist turned newly minted entrepreneur, where I own my own project management consulting firm. My role in WOCIP is currently the board secretary, and I've also been a part of WOCIP for about 3 years or so.
Yeah, and I've had the pleasure of working with all of you, which has been inspirational to me. Why don't we start with you, Annie? Can you talk a little bit about the impact WOCIP has had from a gender equity standpoint on the women in our organization? You're a founder, so you've been here from the beginning.
Yeah. Some of the impact that I feel that has resonated amongst all of the women is a sense of feeling a connection, of feeling a sense of being nurtured, and knowing that they have the support of the entire WOCIP organization. It forces you as a woman to recognize through some of the coaching that we offer, some of the professional development features that we offer, that you can strive for betterment in whatever area you want, your professional development and your personal development, especially through the coaching.
And Kat, you mentioned having your own business and starting your own business. I saw that happen through your experiences through WOCIP. I'd like to think WOCIP had something to do with that. Could you talk a little bit about your experience of transitioning from an individual contributor to a business owner?
I absolutely can. So one of the things that WOCIP illuminates for women in pharma is that there are issues. There are issues that pharma has not been able to solve, and WOCIP takes those head on. It also, while emphasizing those issues, lets women know that there's some power that they own, and they can take accountability for developing themselves to put themselves in positions and in seats of power. And so that's one of the things that WOCIP did for me. When organizations change, as they do more frequently these days, it's not the organization's job to figure out where you go next. You have to take some ownership of that. And oftentimes women of color don't have the tools or the resources to know how to take those steps. WOCIP did that for me. WOCIP gave me the confidence to know that I am more than my role. I have a lot more to offer to pharma at large, and not just the position or the business unit that I was in. And I had to take ownership of that power.
Wow, that's powerful. You're more than your role.
You're more than your role.
That's awesome. And Lorena, from our Latina sisters, can you share what has been your experience? You're one of our newest board members.
So, yes, it's been amazing, and it's one of the best decisions I've made, not only on the professional side, but in the personal side as well. It's been enlightening for me to do this self-assessment to understand what I lack when you talk about some skills that are necessary to progress. But it was even more difficult to me to make that self-assessment and understand what I have and what I am good at. And this community, this sisterhood, was exactly what I needed. And now I am on a personal mission on passing it over.
Wow. That's very powerful. As I observed the organization growing and expanding, we wanted to better connect with our Latina sisters. So it's so refreshing to see you become part of our experience and have a positive one, and the impact coming on as a board member. It's been amazing to see that transition for you.
Muchas gracias.
And personal development, just to piggyback back on that a little bit, personal development, as Kat was speaking, I can say for myself personally, WOCIP has encouraged me just being in the presence of all of the not only the board members, but you get the energy from the members as well. I have always wanted to pursue further in my career, and I did. I decided to go back and get my MBA, and I will receive it at the end of this year.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so it is inspiring knowing that you have the support of your sisterhood, and you just strive for betterment.
So the nurturing
The nurturing
environment, the
environment.
networking, the confidence is having everybody making moves they may not have necessarily made before.
Absolutely.
That's great.
I mean, I can speak to personal experience. I moved to Denmark for work, and it was not until that moment where I said, I need to find community immediately. And so, and, for obvious reasons. And so, my husband helped me to find WOCIP, and we never looked back. And so finding that community, helping you to kind of really frame and target what it is that you want to do, what it is that you can do, and really structure your development plan and your personal development accordingly.
So we inspire and inspire others.
Absolutely, lift as we climb. Absolutely.
So you, building on your, what you mentioned, community, the importance of community. Can you talk a little bit about what WOCIP is doing now forward-looking in terms of having a greater impact in the community, leveraging the Pharma platform?
Absolutely. I think one of the key components of WOCIP is how we can engage the community and really come around, particularly women, and really transform those gaps and really meet the needs of women where they're at, which is the difference between equality and equity. I think there's for sure an opportunity to understand that, if we use gender equity as an example, it transcends the pharma industry, it transcends nations, it transcends governments across the board. As such, WOCIP established the 501c3 foundation arm for the specific purpose to be very intentional around engaging our communities and really supporting women in a very real way. One of the examples is recently we supported an organization that's creating scientists, and they're like from elementary school to high school, they're learning how to do bench science work. And these are young women of color who otherwise would have never had this opportunity. I think it's critical that we have that type of representation, because when you think about the conversation of equity, those little girls may not have had the benefit of ever seeing that before versus other girls who kind of grew up in that space and know what that looks like. And that career path and trajectory is very clear.
Yeah, so powerful. Starting at a very young age, seeding that aspiration that you can be a scientist, you can do more. And there are women who look like you that are doing it.
Right.
Annie, can you talk a little bit about what you've done outside of WOCIP as a result of being part of the board, growing as a leader, and you've taken a lot of this back to your role professionally?
Yes, I have. As a founding member, being outside of Pharma, I support Pharma in my role as a being a part of CRO. We did not have the same types of employee resource groups formulated that supported women or supported diverse Black ERG. And so I decided to formulate one at my CRO. So I'm currently the chair of the Women's Empowerment Network. And we started last year. We're on our second year. And it has propagated out to have 16 different chapters around the company.
It's amazing.
And all in 16 different locations. Wow. So that all started because of my experience with WOCIP and knowing that this was something that was truly needed for women.
Absolutely.
Pat, can I go back to something Vickie mentioned? So she mentioned traveling to Denmark and meeting community, and she mentioned community, but WOCIP is a global community.
Absolutely.
She also mentioned meeting women where they are. So we are a collective of women of color, and that is African American and Latino women and women from across the globe. Right? And we all might be in different places in our pharmaceutical journey just because of who we are. So just wanted to.
Absolutely.
Well, just going to that as well, you just defined our target audience as Black and Latino women globally. We have a global organization. We're also seeing a lot of our women taking on similar roles like you, building out their own companies that are servicing the pharmaceutical industry, which is awesome to see that transition. Can you talk a little bit about how do you see those sorts of shifts making an impact in gender equity?
Absolutely. So there was a Forbes article that I read recently. I think it came out in March of 2019, specifically talking about gender inequality and how it's leading to more women to go into entrepreneurship. And of that cohort, there is a larger number of women of color that are starting their own businesses. And it's namely because it allows them to, number one, take control of their finances. So the equity piece. Oftentimes we know we're probably not getting what we deserve for a myriad of reasons. And it also allows you to control the social constructs of your company. You can create the culture that you want, and you're not boxed into being forced into a culture that's probably not fit for you, or it's not going to support what you need and the way that you need it. So this equity piece, I think, is playing out in a very real way in how you see women starting their own businesses.
Going back on that topic, I wanted to mention that one of the pillars that we founded, that the foundation was kind of based on, is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, including gender equity, economic growth opportunities, and health equity as well. And I think having those as our focus on how we create programming and development opportunities to help kind of prepare women to meet the moment and the current kind of market to transform the communities where they live is critical.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Lorena, any thoughts from you that you'd like to share from one of our leaders of the Global Leadership Committee, what you've observed from a gender equity standpoint?
So I think there are two very important things that are related to this. The first one is the gender part, and the other one is the cultural part. Like, it doesn't really matter where you are. I don't want to say that we are already in a disadvantage because of being women, but yes, we are. And also, like, the race, the color of your skin, and where you're from is like an additional hurdle or an additional barrier that you need to trespass no matter where you are. So we have embedded cultural behaviors of just like being hardworking, responsible, and just okay with what we receive. No? So that, tagging back to the equitable leadership framework that we are developing, is providing us the awareness and building the tools on making sure that no matter where you are, you can make it. And you can reach out for help. You can see all the programming that we're developing. You can utilize all the resources, and you can always rely on your network, because that is what we are. I wanted to say that we found that power, like individually, but also as a collective. And this is becoming stronger, not only here, but in Europe, in Latin America, in Canada. We're building it day after day.
Thank you. Annie, being one of the founders, can you talk a little bit about the network? I mean, it is a critical aspect of the organization. On the one side, we focused on programming for personal growth, professional growth, but the other aspect is the network that Lorena just spoke about. Your thoughts on the importance of networking to build your equity?
So important. I think women, we tend to make friends easily, but we need to be a bit more strategic on networking and focusing on who you want to be associated with and who you want to take learnings from, right? So it's okay to be friends with the CEO, because the CEO also has friends that possibly you know. And that did occur with me. Who knew? And when you open yourself up to the availability of being available and networking, it can be utilized throughout your career. Pat and I met in the 90s. And
don't tell them.
and that connection has stayed throughout the years. It helped with the formulation of WOCIP.
Yeah.
I got a phone call in 2015, right? And it was based on that networking that occurred. So you build upon that, and you should always build upon that in your career. Think people move and go to different companies, but that opens you up to even more possibilities of networking and being exposed to different people.
And we saw data from Women in the Workplace report, Lead-In's report from 2019 and 2018, that women of color are not necessarily getting the sponsorship. They don't have that network that will promote. So part of the gap that WOCIP is trying to fill is creating that network. So I just want to do a round of final comments from all of you on the impact, potential future impact on gender equity that you see WOCIP making. Why don't we start with you, Kat?
So I think one thing that I always think about in this collective is if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And something that Lorena mentioned that reminded me that WOCIP is changing the conversation. Like equity is becoming a word that not only amongst the board or amongst the members that we're utilizing, but we are putting that word out into the atmosphere. And people are going to start to have to answer or at least think about it from their own perspective. Is it equitable where I am? So for the future, I think equity will be a part of the conversation. And WOCIP will be at the forefront of the thought leadership, helping to push the agenda.
Wow, I love that, changing the conversation, putting equity at the forefront. And
piggybacking a little on what Kat just said as well, the equity is something that you are thinking of. With WOCIP, you're thinking of it because it's the conversation that's going on, not just right now. It has been from the beginning of WOCIP, right? So being in this type of organization is foundational, because that is something that we will always make sure that our members and ourselves, but our members are thinking of. When you are attempting to be strategic and think about your roles, think about what you want for your role in the future, and always have that to the forefront.
Lorena.
So when we talk about gender equity, one of my favorite and not so favorite quotes is from Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo, when she said that women do not help women enough. And as Kat is saying, we're changing that conversation because we know that there are not enough places yet enough for us. And we're going to go and get them. And we're going to go and get them. But we're going to go and get them, and we're going to transform the marketplace, and we're going to help build this a better world. Right.
Fantastic. Vickie.
I think when we think about what's next and what's in the future, particularly for WOCIP, even though in our name is embedded the notion of the pharmaceutical industry, partnerships outside of the pharmaceutical industry are critical, because the challenges and the gaps facing our gender, our race is pretty much across the board. And so being able to partner and then potentially bringing innovation that exists outside of our industry to our industry to help move the gauge, going into spaces of public and private partnerships, and potentially changing policy as it relates to the gender equity conversation. I think there's definitely opportunities and space for that. And I think, if there's anyone who's prepared to meet that moment, women are. So
it's big talk.
But women are naturally collaborative.
Right.
So, and there are inroads in the works right now, as a matter of fact, of doing just that, of working with partners outside Pharma. Because women, gender equity is important, not just in Pharma, but it's just important for women.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be an iterative process. We're going to learn as we go, and we're going to evolve. And it's going to be really exciting to see where we go.
And one last comment, if I may.
Absolutely.
Once a woman feels included and represented and meaningfully part of the decisions of the table, it is so much easier for her to include others, and to invite others to participate in those conversations and make those decisions. And that is how the sustainable change and the meaningful change will happen. So that's what we're doing.
Wow, thank you, ladies. Wonderful conversation with WOCIP leaders on gender equity. Thank you, Ideagen, for this opportunity again. I want to thank our board members for participating, and a shout out to George for collaborating with WOCIP during this Women and Girls Empowerment Summit. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the summit.